Neighborhood Church, happy Super Bowl Sunday. You guys look good today in your jerseys. I love it. My name is Jordan. I played football for one season in 7th grade. I played a very important position. It was called sitting on the bench before realizing that art and music were probably my calling. Hey, this is one of our favorite Sundays of the year. What's not to love? We got our jerseys on, tailgating in the parking lot, funny commercials. It's going to be a fun Sunday. And listen, as you could surmise from the story I just told you, I'm not really that athletic of a guy. I'm not super into sports. But here's the thing, I love a Super Bowl party. And this is significant because I'm a bit of an introvert. My social battery runs out pretty easily these days. You know how it is when the invites start piling up, when you're at the 5th birthday party for one of your kids' schoolmates at Chuck E. Cheese and you question every life decision you've ever made. When you're invited to the 7th wedding in June and this one's a destination wedding. You introverts, you get what I'm saying, right? Our social battery starts to die. But there is one invite that I will never turn down. An invite that I would go so far as to say is an irresistible invite. And that is the invite to a Super Bowl Sunday party. What's the difference, Jordan, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's why. Buffalo wings, chips and dip, crock pots filled with those little barbecue meatballs, taquitos dunked in giant jars of queso blanco. The list goes on. I love the Super Bowl parties because I love food. Junk food in particular. Can I get an amen out there today? Yes, yes. Thank you, fellow fat kids. Because of that, a Super Bowl party is an irresistible invitation. And that's exactly what I want to talk about this morning, irresistible invitations. I've received a few of these throughout my life. I remember one day I got a call from my childhood best friend. His name's David. And he said, hey, I have a friend who works at Disneyland who just gave me free tickets. And also, my grandma has extra timeshare points that she gave to me. What would you say to a free weekend at Disneyland? And I said, yes, David, that's what I say, because that is an irresistible invitation. So we had a great time at Disneyland for free. I also think back to 2011. It was the day of my bachelor party. And me and my friends, we had some exciting plans for that evening, all of them entirely appropriate and not sketchy, things we can talk about in church, obviously. But I was walking out of my office, and my old office was on top of a bank. And one of the financial planners came up to me and said, hey, you there? And I said, me? He said, yes. We own a VIP box at CenturyLink Stadium where the Seattle Sounders play. This is when I was living in Seattle. And I said, that's cool. And he said, yeah, we've got all these tickets, but no one can use them tonight. Do you want these? And I said, yes, Mr. Financial Planner, I want those tickets. That is an irresistible invitation. And so when I met up with my friends, I surprised my bachelor party with a night out in our very own VIP box at the Seattle Sounders game. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, an irresistible invitation. Now, sometimes an irresistible invitation has to be seen to be believed. Sometimes we don't realize it's irresistible until we accept it. I remember one time I was a little kid, about 5 years old probably. My dad came up to me and said, pack it up, Jordan, I'm taking you somewhere. And I said, well, where are we going? He said, just come and see, you'll find out. Now, as a kid, I was always excited to get out of the house, but I had questions. I mean, was my dad taking me somewhere fun? Was he tricking me into doing errands or chores or going hunting or some masculine activity I didn't actually want to do? You know, what's going on here? But I trusted my dad, and again, I was only 5, so I didn't really have an option, so I went with him, and what I didn't realize is that I had just received the greatest invite a child could ever receive, because when we arrived at our destination, my mind was blown because my dad had bought tickets to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles coming out of their Shells tour, and oh my gosh, how did we get that photo? I don't know. Well, okay. Look at those Ninja Turtle pants. Those are incredible. I don't know if my parents conspired with the media team or what, but yes, that is me. And my dad took me to the Ninja Turtles coming out of their Shells tour. I didn't even realize the Ninja Turtles were a band. This was like Woodstock for millennial children. There was nothing else in the world I could have been more hyped for. And we went, it was amazing. The Turtles, they fought the bad guys, the Foot Clan and Shredder. They played their songs. Donatello played the guitar. It was an incredible experience. I think somewhere in my parents' garage, I couldn't find it this week, but we have a cassette tape that I bought at the concert. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And when I was thinking about it this week, honestly, if my dad tried to explain to me where we were going, I don't think my mind could have grasped the greatness. I don't think my mind could have understood how irresistible this invitation was. Really, at the end of the day, I just had to show up and see for myself. And I think that's true for so many irresistible invitations in life. They come with those three words: come and see. Come and see. I want to tell you a story from the life of Jesus today that actually includes those three words. At the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, before he performed any miracles, before he preached to large crowds, before he made a name for himself, he was traveling around inviting people to follow him. And even early on, he was making a name for himself. One by one, he started inviting people to follow him, people who had no idea how much their lives were about to change. And this brings us to John chapter 1, verses 43 through 51. Where Jesus extends an irresistible invitation that turns a skeptic into a believer. Jesus was traveling through Galilee, a region in northern Israel, and he happens upon a man named Philip. And without much introduction, we read that Jesus simply said this: "Follow me, follow me." Now, this invitation is simple, but in that day and age was a really big deal. See, Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher. And in Jewish culture, rabbis were highly respected. The best and brightest young Hebrew men would study the scriptures, the Old Testament, what we call now, hoping that one day a rabbi would invite them to become a disciple, a student or an apprentice, someone who would follow the rabbi, learn from the rabbi, and ultimately become a rabbi themselves. But it was an exclusive invitation. Not everyone made the cut. Most young Hebrew boys stopped their formal religious training in their early teens, and they went back to working in their family trade, whether it's carpentry or fishing or farming. If a rabbi didn't choose you, the window closed, and that was it. This made it very competitive. But what's interesting about Jesus is that he didn't go around inviting the elite of the elite, the wealthiest students. He was inviting everyday, ordinary guys. Guys like Philip. And Philip is so excited about meeting Jesus and receiving this invitation that he immediately runs to his friend Nathanael. And he says this: "Hey, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Now let's pause for a minute. When he's talking about Moses and the prophets, again, he's referring to the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament. And he's talking about promises every Jewish person would have been deeply familiar with. Because for generations, the Israelites had been looking for a promised leader, a promised savior, the one God had said would come to rescue them, restore justice, and establish God's kingdom on earth. And all throughout the Hebrew scriptures, there were clues and hints and promises about this coming Messiah. So when Philip goes to Nathanael and says, "We found him," I mean, this is huge news. This is unprecedented. But Nathanael's response, it's a little skeptical. Maybe he's been burned before, but he responds with skepticism and says this: "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" Nathanael's skeptical. He's throwing shade. He's not impressed, and this makes sense because if you study the history, Nazareth was a small, unimpressive village just kind of on the outskirts. It wasn't known for any major scholars or leaders or anything significant. Nazareth was the kind of place you'd pass through on your way to go somewhere better. It was kind of like Bakersfield, California, which I'm allowed to say that because I was born there. So I get a lifetime pass. Sorry to any of my Baco brethren in the room today. But to Nathanael, the idea that the Messiah, the one who was supposed to change the world, would come from this backwater town of Nazareth, well, to him that was absolutely ridiculous. And I think it's interesting, in that moment, Philip doesn't argue with him. He doesn't use like grad school seminary apologetic prowess to win him over. He doesn't use facts and logic. They don't get into a debate. Philip just says 3 words: come and see. Come and see. Come and see for yourself. So Nathanael decides to check it out. And when he approaches, Jesus says this: here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. It's kind of a strange greeting, but in essence, Jesus is saying, man, here's a stand-up guy. Here's a straight shooter. Here's an integrous man. And Nathanael's caught off guard. I'm sure he's flattered, but he says, how do you know me? And Jesus replies, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip even called you. Now, in Jewish tradition, fig trees are traditionally places where people would reflect and pray. But what blows Nathanael's mind isn't that Jesus mentioned the tree, it's that he saw him there. Not physically, but somehow supernaturally. And in that moment, Nathanael realizes this Jesus knows things that no one else could possibly know. His mind is blown, his skepticism melts away, and Nathanael blurts out, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. And Jesus responds, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. He then added, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. What does that mean? There's a lot of loaded religious language here. Let's unpack that for a second. Jesus is referring back to Genesis. It's the very first book in the Hebrew scripture. And there's a story where a man named Jacob had a dream about a ladder that stretched from heaven to earth. And it was a sign that God was reaching out to humanity. And these angels were climbing up and down. So when Jesus says that the Son of Man is the ladder, Son of Man being Jesus' favorite title for himself, the Son of Man is the ladder, he is saying that I am the one who's come to bridge the gap between God and humanity. I am the ladder between heaven and earth. And if you follow me, you are going to see things you never thought possible. I think what's so fascinating about Jesus' invitation to these regular blue-collar guys is this, that his invitation is not come and agree, but come and see. It's not even necessarily come and believe, it's come and see. And so many times in the church, we get that backwards. We make following Jesus like a contract where we need to sign it up front like we're in a car dealership, that we have to check every box, agree with every doctrine, have it all figured out, get our mess together. But that's not how Jesus operates. That's not what we see in his story as he called his followers. This is why we're inspired at Neighborhood to keep saying over and over again until we're blue in the face, that you can belong before you believe. The invitation to this family we call Neighborhood Church, the invitation with life in Jesus, it's a come and see invitation. It's not a come and agree. It's not a come and believe. It's not you got to go through 3 classes, fill out the dotted line and get yourself together before you can hang out. No, you can belong before you believe, because we believe it takes actually experiencing Jesus to believe in him, to see him as he is, to believe that he is the one he claims to be. When Jesus called his disciples, he didn't demand a confession of faith on the spot. He simply said, follow me, walk with me, watch what I do, listen to what I teach. Let's wrestle with big questions together. And after spending time with Jesus, sure, the disciples, they wrestled with doubt. Sure, there were ups and downs, but ultimately their experience with him led to their faith. Belief was the natural result of life with Jesus. And I think that's how faith grows. Not from being pressured to believe one way or another, not from memorizing facts out of the Bible, but by actually encountering Jesus for ourselves. This is still the invitation of Christianity today, this come and see invitation. Not come and have all the answers up front, not come and get your act together, not come and sign on the dotted line, just come and see. Walk with Jesus, listen to his words, consider his ways, and see what he might do in your life. Because at the end of the day, we think that when we cut out all the religious baggage, the cultural distractions, and the legalistic superstition, when we fix our eyes squarely on Jesus as he is, who he was, what he said, what he came to do, we find an irresistible invitation. One that sounds like this: come and see.
That's great. Oh my goodness. Again, welcome to Super Sunday. We're always so excited to have a little fun and throw a party. And anyone already sample some of the food out there? Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And by the way, those are just people just like you. They just attend neighborhood church and are just being so gracious with their time and talent. Make sure you take part after the service. Hey, so Jordan started a conversation on invitation, this idea of invitation, and I just thought I'd kind of do the second half here and continue that conversation and kind of lean into this idea of why we're even talking about invitations, why they matter, why they're powerful, and how really they can actually change everything. And to make my point, what I'd like to do is actually kind of rewind about 2,000 years to what is essentially the very first ever sort of church business meeting, where kind of everybody gets together and they're trying to make some decisions. And this business meeting actually gets a little hostile. So there's some conflict. There's some very strong opinions in the room. And they're kind of having a bit of a debate. And the story is actually told in an ancient document that we call the Book of Acts. And the Book of Acts is so fascinating because it actually tells the story of how we go from Jesus and like 12 followers to a global movement. The Book of Acts sort of outlines how the Christian church really sort of gets its legs and becomes, 2,000 years later, this thing that's got billions of followers and it's all over the globe and all of that. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. It took time, and the Book of Acts sort of tells how we got here. And so the scene of this church business meeting is taking place about 20 years after Jesus has died, he's resurrected, and he's now back operating from the heavenly spiritual realm. And at this point, Christianity isn't like its own religion or its own faith movement. It's really still seen as a branch or an arm of the Jewish faith or Judaism. And this is where the conflict is really coming from, because there are a bunch of Jewish leaders who said, look, for like new people coming in because they like Jesus, they need to become Jewish first. So they got to jump through all the religious hoops and become Jewish first if they want to follow Jesus. But there was another group of people who said, no, that's ridiculous. They should be able to just follow Jesus without becoming Jewish first, because we're pretty sure Jesus was actually kind of doing something brand new. And this was actually the beginning of Christianity actually breaking away from Judaism and becoming its own sort of faith movement, detached from the Jewish faith. So again, there's this kind of battle. There's these hardcore Jewish religious leaders that, listen, Gentiles, that's a fancy word for non-Jew, when they come in to follow Jesus, they have to become Jewish. But no, there's another sort of group saying that's ridiculous and that Christianity isn't any longer an extension of Judaism. It's something entirely new. And so they argued, and they said, listen, and the people arguing for Christianity being its own new thing, what they were saying essentially was that Judaism, or the Jewish faith, was like the cocoon, and that the butterfly being born out of the cocoon, out of this environment, was Christianity. It was this Jesus movement. And so they're back and forth, there's fighting, there's yelling, there's this whole situation going on. And right in the middle of all of that, the half-brother of Jesus, his name is James, he sort of stands up in the middle, and he's sort of the de facto leader at this point. And he stands up, and he says something that just sort of quiets the crowd and says, this is how we're going to operate moving forward. And here's what he says. He says this: it's my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for anyone who's turning to God. In other words, if people are searching, if they're looking for answers, we shouldn't make it harder for them. If there's anything unnecessarily difficult standing in the way, we should actively be removing it. And this is actually exactly the kind of church that Neighborhood Church wants to be. We want to be a church that models ourselves after the early church that said, look, let's not make it difficult for people who are exploring faith and Jesus and God and all of it. And so maybe we could say it like this, that we actually want to be like the early church, a church where unchurched people love to attend, where people who maybe have never been to church or haven't been to church in decades or were really hurt by church. They've just had a really bad church experience. We want to be a church for those kind of people where they can come in and it's a safe space. It's a safe space for them to exist, where they can belong and be a part of this family we call Neighborhood Church without agreeing with everything that we believe. A place where you can ask questions and wrestle with doubts and just be around great people without feeling pressure to sort of have it all figured out. And again, this isn't our idea. We're not trying to be new or cool or hip. We actually think it was Jesus' idea. And more than that, the people who first started following Jesus, it was really them kind of figuring out how to do this. And so if you've been around Neighborhood for a while, we call ourselves a Jesus church. And so if we're going to be a Jesus church, we should operate in the way that Jesus sort of set out for us to operate. And that means that we don't make it hard for people who want to explore faith and God and Jesus and all of that. And that we should actually be actively inviting people to the party to say, hey, come, this is a safe place. I know you've been hurt at that last church, but you really should try Neighborhood Church. And listen, some of you get this. Some of you absolutely understand it. Some of you take this really, really personally, actually, because once upon a time, somebody invited you. And you remember the first time that you pulled into our parking lot. And you remember how nervous you felt. And you remember the first time somebody invited you and you said no, and you made up some excuse of why you couldn't, just to get them off your back. But maybe they didn't give up. And maybe they invited 2 or 3 other people to also start inviting you. And finally, they just kind of wore you down. And you thought, fine, I'll go one time just to shut them up. Right? Or maybe it was your spouse who convinced you, or maybe it was your kids who convinced you. But whatever got you here, you remember the first time you were here. And you were nervous, and you weren't sure what to expect, and then you showed up, and like, they threw footballs in church, and they were giving away free food, and you were like, hey, you were surprised, right? You were like, wow, this is totally crazy. And you didn't necessarily believe everything we believed, but it was helpful and it was positive and the people were awesome. And you were like, you know what? I think I can come back to this place. I think I might actually even try to come back next week. And if that's your story, then you actually understand better than most people the power of an invitation. Now, some of you, on the other hand, do not understand what I'm talking about. And it's not your fault. You just grew up in church, right? You've never really experienced what it's like to be kind of unchurched or haven't been to church in decades or hurt by church. Like you don't know what that's like. And here's the truth, if that's you, until you invite somebody and see our church through their eyes, you will never fully grasp why it is we do the stuff that we do here at Neighborhood Church. Because when you invite someone, suddenly everything matters more. Parking matters more. Kids check-in matters more. You start thinking, I hope Jordan's not preaching. That guy's terrible, right? I mean, you're like, I hope the music's just right. Like everything matters. You start to see like all of a sudden, for example, today, I don't know about you, but somebody needs to turn the air conditioners on in here. It's like 1,000 degrees, and I don't know what's going on, and it's bothering me a lot right now. And somebody is gonna get fired because it's too hot in here. And I think that because I'm seeing that through the lens of maybe those of you that are here for the very first time, and you're like, why would I come back? It's too hot. I agree. I'm not coming back next week. It's right? But all of a sudden, you're just invested in a very different way when you invite somebody who's maybe not necessarily a church person or a Bible person or whatever. And if you've never had that experience, if you've never invited somebody who didn't already go to church, then as much as you may love what we do, you won't actually ever fully get why we do it. And here's why this matters. Because the key to keeping this a church, a place where unchurched people sort of love to attend, the key is you. You have to keep inviting the people in your orbit. It's your willingness to invite your friends and family and neighbors, right? And those of you that are doing that, we actually listen to what you have to say. Because inviters, they know how to complain, right? Inviters complain about the right stuff. Church people, they complain about all the wrong stuff, right? They just do, right? And here's a little behind the scenes for you. We can tell the difference. We really can. When we get feedback from an inviter, we listen because we care about how a new person is experiencing our church. But when we hear insider complaints from people who've just been in church their whole life and just want it a certain way, well, we don't listen to you. Because at the end of the day, we're not here to make church people happy. We're here to be a church that unchurched people love to attend, that we exist for the people that aren't here yet. And like the early church, we don't want to make it unnecessarily challenging and difficult for people who are just wanting to explore. And the gravitational pull of every church, this is just consistent for every church, is to become insider focused. That's just the natural sort of bend in how churches operate. So we actually have to be really intentional to say, nope, we're gonna keep reminding ourselves that we need to be inviters, that we need to be caring about how people who have been hurt by church or haven't been to church or never been to church or whatever, that we need to keep seeing church through their eyes. Now, you're like, well, how do I invite somebody to church? It's really, really simple, actually. To invite somebody to church, it really takes one sentence. Really? You should come to my church. That's it. That's all you got to do. You should come to my church. That's it. And here's how you know when you should bring that invitation. It's when one of three things is happening in somebody's life. Number one, they let you know somehow, some way that they're not in church, right? They're not in church. Right? For whatever reason, we don't really go to church. I mean, that's probably the best one, right? Like, I've never really done the church thing, and I'm not really a Bible person, or the last church I was at, there was so-and-so, or we got kicked out because apparently we were too naughty. That person, you hear that, or if you hear, it's not going well in my life. Work is stressful. My marriage is on the rocks. My teenagers won't talk to me. To that, you should say, why are you complaining about your teenagers not talking to you? No, I'm just kidding. My teenagers in the room love you. Or maybe this one, I'm not prepared for this season in my life. We just had a baby, just started a new job, just moved into a new house. Like, it's just, oh my gosh, it's freaking out. If you hear any of these, your next sentence should be, really? You should come to my church, right? That's it. That's all you got to do. You don't even have to, maybe you don't even like that person, so don't invite them to sit with you. Just invite them to come to your church, right? Now, if you do like the person, they can sit with you, right? No long explanation, no pressure, just an invitation. Now, here's why I think you should do it. Here's why I think you should do it. Because you don't know what hangs in the balance. You just don't. You don't know what hangs in the balance when it comes to your willingness to invite someone. And on the flip side, you actually don't know what hangs in the balance because of your hesitation to invite someone. You just don't know the answer to those questions. But here's what we know about invitations. Every defining moment of your life, there's an invitation involved. Hey, you should come with me too, whatever it is. And you went, and you had the best time of your life, and now it's like a core memory. Every defining moment of your life, there was an invitation involved, right? And you have no idea what could happen if you finally just invited that neighbor or that coworker or that friend or that family member. You have no idea what could change for them, right? One invitation, it could change your life. It could change your kid's life. It could change their grandkid's life, right? You just don't know. I mean, I'm here. I'm here because somebody invited me. I didn't grow up in the church. I was not a church kid. I didn't do any of that. Somebody invited me to church one day, and now it's been 30 years, and I'm your pastor. Am I your pastor if I don't get that invite? I don't know, but maybe not. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of our willingness to just say, really? You should come to my church. And if you do that, not only could it possibly change somebody's life and their family's life, but you'll ensure that we remain the kind of church that always has the unchurched in mind. A church that wants to model itself after the very first church who fought over this. And finally, James had the courage to stand up and say, you know what? I don't think we should make it challenging for people who are asking questions and are looking for a safe space to explore. And here's my promise to you. I'll do the heavy lifting. Neighborhood church, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure that every week the music is good and that the teaching's good and that the kids check in and parking, and apparently we've got a problem with air conditioning. But other than that, like, we're really gonna make sure, right? Like, that it's all just right for your friend or your family member or your coworker. I promise that's what we'll do. We'll do the heavy lifting. I'll do all the explaining for you. You don't have to tell them anything. Just invite them here. That's your job, my job. We'll make sure this place. You know what we call it behind the scenes? When we think about planning services and doing all of that, we call it, we just want to be predictably excellent every week. We want to be predictably excellent. Why? For your friends. It's not even really for you. It's for the people you're going to invite. It's for the people that aren't here yet. Because one day, at some point, you got invited. And because you're invited, you're here, maybe your family's here, your kids are here, and your life's different because somebody invited you. We need to keep inviting. Just keep our doors open and make sure that nobody misses out. That just like the early Jesus people, they were invited to be inviters. Same message applies. We're invited to be inviters. And it's irresistible. You get them here. We'll take care of the rest. I mean, Jordan does preach sometimes. I understand. But for the most part. All right, we okay? We good? Time to maybe go eat some tri-tip. And there's some potato tacos out there that are amazing. Chili, it's just so great. So make sure you spend a few minutes and hang out and have a great time cheering for the Eagles. And I love you. It's okay. Yeah. Let's pray. Jesus, thanks so much for today. Thanks so much for the invitation that came in our life. And now we're here, and now we know you, and it's changed everything because Jesus, you make life better, and you make us better at life. We're so glad for this place that we call Neighborhood Church and the people that make it up, that make it such a wonderful, inviting, compassionate community that cares about people that aren't here yet. We're so grateful for this place that we get to call home and this family that we get to call ours. Jesus, we love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.